A drunk millionaire blocked the National Guard's ceremonial march, shouting insults and laughing. But when one soldier stepped out of line with quiet authority, the crowd fell silent, and so did he. Let us know in the comments which state you're watching from. It started on a warm spring afternoon in Washington, D.C., when the city buzzed with tourists, school field trips, and camera flashes. The U.S. Capitol stood tall in the background, its gleaming dome basking in sunlight, while the National Mall bustled with families and visitors. On Constitution Avenue, the sound of traffic mingled with the distant beat of marching boots as the National Guard rehearsed a ceremonial transition. And that's when he arrived. A sleek, jet-black Escalade pulled up at the corner, drawing a few curious glances. Out stepped Brandon Ellis, a man whose name had become synonymous with viral controversy. A millionaire tech investor turned lifestyle influencer, Brandon was best known not for his success, but for his arrogance. His signature mirrored sunglasses, gold chain, and designer loafers didn't exactly scream humble. Neither did the camera crew that followed him everywhere like paparazzi shadows. "Let's make some noise, baby!" He barked at the camera, throwing his arms wide as if the entire city was his stage. Brandon wasn't just there to film a typical vlog. No. Today he had something more theatrical in mind. He had read online that the National Guard would be holding a silent parade drill in honor of an upcoming holiday. In his mind, it was the perfect setup for a prank. Disrupting it, mocking it, and getting millions of views was all part of the plan. On the edge of the street, a platoon of 8 soldiers stood in formation. Impeccable posture, eyes straight ahead, uniforms perfectly pressed, rifles gleaming under the sun. Not a single twitch or blink broke their discipline. Among them stood Specialist Daniel Morales, a third-generation soldier from El Paso, Texas. With 2 deployments behind him and a humble reputation among his peers, Morales was known for being calm, composed, and deadly serious about tradition. To Morales, this wasn't just a drill, it was a sacred duty. As the soldiers marched in perfect unison, Brandon jumped onto the sidewalk with exaggerated claps. "Wow, look at these 10 soldiers!" he yelled, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Real intimidating!" Some tourists chuckled nervously, unsure if this was part of a performance. A father near the steps of the Capitol pulled his son closer. A woman recording the parade lowered her phone, eyes narrowing at Brandon. Brandon, emboldened by the cameras and lack of immediate reaction, strutted toward the street, raising his voice. I mean, come on, do they even talk? Or are they just like robots? Hello? He waved a hand a few inches from Morales' face, careful not to touch him, but close enough to tempt fate. Morales didn't flinch. The rest of the soldiers continued in formation as if Brandon were invisible. But inside, Morales registered the movement. He had been trained not to react, to remain composed, to show restraint unless the line of decorum was truly crossed. Brandon, not satisfied, pulled a small plastic horn from his jacket. "Oh, you guys like silence? Let's see how you like this." The horn blared, sharp and obnoxious, cutting through the reverent atmosphere like a knife. Gasps echoed across the plaza. A mother covered her baby's ears. An older veteran standing near the reflecting pool clenched his jaw, his hand instinctively brushing the brim of his Vietnam-era hat. Even the cameraman filming Brandon whispered, "Dude, maybe that's enough." But Brandon grinned, pointing the horn at Morales again. "Wake up, soldier. It's not nap time." Morales' eyes, hidden behind his service-issue sunglasses, remained fixed on the horizon. But his left boot shifted, just slightly. A signal. A warning. And Brandon missed it. He strutted one step closer, crossing the ceremonial line painted in discreet gray across the edge of the marble steps. The line of respect, as Morales' drill sergeant once called it. a boundary, both physical and symbolic. Then, it happened. With mechanical precision and a sharp stomp, Specialist Morales took one deliberate step forward, his right boot landing with a heavy echo. He raised his rifle in ceremonial rest and spoke, not loudly, but with unmistakable clarity. "Step away from the formation immediately, sir." The crowd froze. Brandon stumbled back half a step, the plastic horn nearly slipping from his hand. "Whoa! Whoa! Okay! He chuckled nervously, trying to recover his swagger. Didn't think they actually talked. Morales didn't move again. He stood tall, rifle firm, eyes locked forward. But the message was clear. Brandon turned toward his crew, mumbling something about editing that part out. But the damage was done. Tourists had already started filming. The atmosphere had shifted. What was meant to be a joke had turned into a public display of arrogance and shame. And for once, Brandon wasn't in control of the narrative. He tried to shake it off, raising his voice again to the crowd. "Hey, it's just a joke, people. Lighten up." But no one laughed. The crowd's respect had shifted, not to the millionaire with cameras, but to the silent man with discipline in his stance. Brandon stood still for a moment, then muttered, "Whatever," and turned back toward the Escalade. But his swagger was gone. His steps were a little quicker now. Behind him, Morales returned to his post. Not a word more, not a smile, just duty and silence. Brandon stepped back, shaken more than he let on. His usual smirk faltered as murmurs spread across the crowd. People were watching, recording. A young boy near the edge of the plaza laughed and said, "That guy just got owned." A veteran silently crossed his arms, nodding with quiet approval at Morales's restraint. Several phones were now pointed not at the influencer, but at the soldier who had taken just one step and turned the tide. Brandon turned toward his Escalade, his swagger noticeably dimmed. But halfway to the car, something stopped him. Maybe it was the sting of public embarrassment. Maybe it was the need to reclaim control over the narrative. Or maybe it was just his pride, massive and fragile, like a glass sculpture in a storm. He spun back around. "No way I'm letting that guy upstage me on my own video," he muttered. He handed his gold-trimmed jacket to his assistant and motioned to his camera crew. "Keep rolling. I'm not done." From across the street, Specialist Morales hadn't moved. His posture was as solid as stone, his rifle held firmly in ceremonial rest. He was aware of Brandon's return. He'd heard the whispers, the changed tone of the crowd. But still, he stood his ground. Brandon approached the line again, slower this time. He laughed, not a loud laugh, but one meant to dismiss the tension, to convince the crowd this was all still a show. Okay, he said loudly, addressing the onlookers. "So apparently our guy here takes his cosplay very seriously." A few heads turned, most remained silent. Brandon crossed the ceremonial boundary once more. Only this time he didn't shout or blare a horn. Instead, he pulled something from his bag, a pair of fake military medals, clearly plastic, clearly mocking. "Since y'all are so into uniforms," he said, smirking at the camera, "maybe I'll join the ranks." He tried to pin them to his shirt dramatically. That's when the tone of the crowd changed for good. A woman with a stroller shook her head in disbelief. "That's not funny. My brother died in uniform," she said aloud, voice cracking slightly. Someone else added, "You're crossing a line, man." But Brandon kept going. He saluted sarcastically toward Morales, and in a loud, mocking tone declared, "Reporting for duty, Sergeant Statue." The plaza felt tense now, taut, like the moment before a thunderclap. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, another step. Specialist Morales, now 2 steps forward from his original position, raised his voice again. "Sir, you are now interfering with a military ceremony. Please return to the public area. His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't theatrical. It was calm, cold, controlled. Brandon's confidence finally cracked. "Oh, you're serious, he said, chuckling nervously. He turned to the crowd again, hoping for backup. But this time, no one laughed. The only sound was the distant rustle of trees in the breeze and the subtle click of cameras continuing to record. For a split second, Brandon seemed to freeze, and then he made a fatal mistake. He reached toward Morales, not to touch him, but to place one of the plastic medals on the soldier's uniform. Gasps. A loud voice from the distance shouted, "Back away now!" Two Capitol Police officers, who had been quietly observing from the sidewalk, were now moving quickly through the crowd. One of them, Officer Reynolds, was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of presence that silenced a room without raising his voice. "Step away from the soldier, sir," Reynolds ordered. Brandon turned around, stunned. "I didn't even touch him." "You crossed a ceremonial line and attempted to place an object on a military uniform during an official formation," Reynolds said clearly. "That's interference." Brandon looked around as if searching for sympathy, but the crowd's faces had hardened. This wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't entertainment. This was disrespect. A tourist from Georgia called out, "He needs to be escorted out. This isn't Hollywood." Another voice, older and quieter, "That man just mocked the people who died for this country." Brandon was now sweating, his carefully styled hair beginning to lose shape. For once, the camera crew kept their distance. Even his assistant looked unsure. The officer gave him a final warning. "Either you return to the public area immediately, or you'll be cited for disorderly conduct." Brandon's voice cracked. "Fine, whatever." He stormed off, chest heaving with shallow breaths. As he passed the crowd, no one applauded. No one called out. The silence was worse than any insult. Morales returned to position with mechanical grace. He had said only 2 sentences, taken 2 steps, and yet he had restored the order of the plaza. The ceremony continued without pause, but for those who had witnessed the exchange, something deeper lingered, a quiet reminder of what respect really looks like. Not flashy, not loud, but rooted in dignity, sacrifice, and unshakable discipline. And Brandon Ellis? He climbed into the Escalade, slammed the door, and told his driver, "Just go." But the story wasn't over yet. Not for the crowd, and certainly not for the internet. By the time Brandon's Escalade turned the corner and disappeared into D.C.'s afternoon traffic, his name had already started trending, but not for the reasons he'd hoped. Within an hour, several bystanders had posted clips of the incident online. One video, shot from behind a marble pillar, caught the precise moment Morales took his decisive step forward and delivered his warning. The caption read, "Respect is earned, not performed." The video spread like wildfire. On TikTok, users stitched their own reactions, some praising Specialist Morales' calm authority, others slamming Brandon Ellis for mocking the uniform. A Marine veteran posted a response, "I don't know who that soldier is, but I'd shake his hand any day." In the comments section, the tide was clear. Brandon Ellis is canceled. This is what self-control looks like. You don't play dress-up with real sacrifice. Back inside his high-rise condo overlooking the Potomac, Brandon sat hunched over his laptop, eyes darting from tab to tab. Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, every platform was lighting up. His PR manager was already calling. "Brandon?" The voice barked over speakerphone. "What the hell did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Brandon snapped, pacing across the living room. "It was just a bit. Everyone overreacted." Overreacted? You insulted a service member on camera during a military ceremony. That's not edgy. That's suicidal for your brand. Brandon gritted his teeth. It was supposed to be funny. That guy could have just ignored me. "He did, Brandon, until you crossed the line." Silence. Outside the window, helicopters circled the Capitol building. The sun had started to set, casting a golden hue across the skyline, but Brandon's mood darkened. He opened his phone again. Messages from sponsors, canceled deals, dozens of comments telling him to apologize, some even threatening to boycott his businesses. His hands trembled slightly. Then a message popped up. It was from someone he hadn't expected. His father. "Your grandfather would be ashamed. Think hard about what kind of man you're becoming." Brandon threw the phone on the couch. Meanwhile, back at Constitution Avenue, Specialist Morales had finished the ceremony without a single misstep. The unit dispersed to the secured staging area nearby, where commanding officers reviewed the day's drill. His superior, Captain Laura Kim, approached him after formation. "You handled that well, Morales," she said, her voice measured. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, straightening his cap. "We've already received 4 emails from bystanders praising your professionalism. Just so you know, command's aware of the situation, and you're in the clear." Morales gave a small nod. "Just did what I was trained to do." She smiled faintly. "You did a little more than that." Later that evening, as Morales sat quietly in the break room sipping coffee from a battered thermos, one of the junior guards handed him a phone. "Sir, you might want to see this." Morales stared at the screen. The clip of his 2-step warning had over 4 million views. Thousands of comments praised his control, his poise, his presence. Someone had even turned the footage into a black and white GIF with the text, "True strength doesn't need volume." Morales didn't react much. He handed the phone back. "I'm just doing my job." But deep down, something stirred in him. Not pride, exactly, but maybe relief. That in a world full of noise and showmanship, a little discipline still meant something. The next day, D.C. buzzed with even more activity than usual. A scheduled veterans event near the National Mall had brought in families from across the country. Dozens of service branches were represented: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Booths were set up with historical displays, children waving flags, and older veterans trading stories. But all the chatter circled one unexpected subject. "Did you see the video of that soldier yesterday? The guy who shut down that rich punk with just a step? Yeah, Morales or something. What a legend." Somewhere in the crowd, a retired master sergeant leaned on his cane and said quietly to his grandson, "Now that's how you carry the uniform." Even members of Congress began to take note. A tweet from a sitting senator read, "Respect to Specialist Morales. That's the kind of quiet leadership this country needs more of." Back in his condo, Brandon watched the same tweet, his face pale, jaw clenched. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. His latest video had over 100,000 dislikes, and his subscribers were dropping by the minute. Even his closest fans were leaving comments like, "This ain't it, Brandon. I used to love your energy, but this was just disrespectful." He scrolled further. Someone had found an old tweet from him in 2019 mocking military cosplay. Another strike. More outrage. His PR team had gone silent, probably working on ways to distance themselves. He felt the walls closing in, but he still had one idea, one desperate thought clawing at him. He would go back. The next morning, Brandon returned to Constitution Avenue. He wore no designer jacket, no gold chains, no camera crew, just jeans, a hoodie, and dark sunglasses. He didn't walk with swagger. He walked like someone looking for something he'd lost. Tourists noticed him, but this time not with excitement. Someone whispered, "That's him." Another muttered, "The disrespect guy." He kept his eyes low, trying to avoid confrontation. But he had a plan. He waited until the National Guard began another drill. Same formation, same steps, same perfect precision. And there, near the back line, stood Specialist Morales, unmoved by the noise around him. Brandon didn't speak. He stood behind the rope line, away from the ceremonial boundary. He waited until the formation ended and the soldiers began to disperse. And then, as Morales passed within 10 feet of him, Brandon stepped forward, not across the rope, not into the space, but just enough to be heard. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Morales didn't stop walking, but he nodded, once. That was enough. Brandon didn't record it. There was no camera, no apology video. Just a quiet moment between two men, one who had forgotten what respect meant and one who had never let it go. Brandon didn't sleep well the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same moment replaying. Specialist Morales stepping forward, eyes unreadable behind his sunglasses, commanding him to step away. But it wasn't the step that haunted him. It was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, but wraps around your ego and squeezes until it cracks. A silence that says more than words ever could. By morning, Brandon felt a weight he couldn't define. He had tried to shake it off with excuses, tried to rationalize the incident as a misunderstanding, even told himself the internet would move on. But as he scrolled through comment after comment, thousands of them, he realized this wasn't going away. And for once, he didn't want it to. He didn't want to bury this one under a joke. He wanted to face it. So, with no camera crew, no sunglasses, and no entourage, Brandon returned to Constitution Avenue. He wore a plain hoodie and jeans, his phone deep in his pocket. The sky was overcast now, a soft gray hanging over the Capitol like a veil. It was quieter than before, as if the city itself had taken a breath. The National Guard was assembling again, rehearsing another drill. Tourists stood back respectfully, watching. Some recognized him immediately. Whispers spread, some subtle, some sharp. "That's him. The guy from the video. He's got nerve coming back here." But Brandon didn't respond. He didn't look around for attention. He kept his head down and stopped just behind the rope line. Across the plaza, Specialist Morales stood in formation once more, the same unshakable posture, the same calm. Brandon waited. He didn't shout. He didn't perform. He waited until the drill ended and the soldiers began to disperse in silence. And then, when Morales passed within earshot, Brandon simply said, "I'm sorry." 2 words, no excuses, no spin, just truth. Morales didn't stop walking, but his head turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge the voice. A pause, a breath, a nod, nothing more. But to Brandon, that nod said everything. He left the plaza without another word. Back at the barracks, Morales returned to his locker, placed his rifle in its mount, and took off his gloves. The day's ceremony had passed without disruption, but the tension from earlier in the week still lingered in the unit. Morales didn't speak much. He never did. But everyone around him felt something had shifted. There was respect in the way they looked at him, not just for what he did, but for what he didn't do. Later that evening, Captain Laura Kim approached him in the mess hall. "Was that him?" she asked softly. Morales nodded. "Did he apologize?" Morales sipped his coffee, then replied, "Yes." Captain Kim hesitated, then said, "You did well. You reminded people what it means to wear the uniform." Morales looked out the window, where a group of cadets walked in formation under the fading orange sky. Their boots struck the pavement in rhythm, each step a reminder of something bigger than themselves. "It's not about me," he said quietly. It never was. Over the following days, the story continued to grow. But this time, it wasn't about scandal. It was about principle. News outlets began framing the narrative not around Brandon's mistake, but around Morales's response. Podcasts discussed it as a case study in leadership. veterans groups praised the soldiers' unwavering professionalism. One morning, Morales received a letter postmarked from Kansas. Inside was a photo of a young boy, maybe 10 years old, dressed in a Halloween soldier costume. Attached was a handwritten note. "My son saw the video and said he wants to be like you when he grows up. Not because you looked cool, but because you stood still when others wouldn't. Thank you." Morales folded the note carefully and slipped it into the breast pocket of his uniform. He didn't reply. He didn't post it online. He just carried it with him. As for Brandon, things didn't magically go back to normal. His subscriber count dropped, sponsors pulled out. But he didn't vanish either. Instead, he started volunteering quietly at a local VA hospital. No cameras, no content. Just hours spent listening to veterans, men and women with scars visible and invisible, talk about their service, their families, their regrets, and their pride. He began to understand what he had mocked. Not the ceremony, not the uniform, but the weight those things carried, the lives behind them. One afternoon, while helping an older Navy veteran organize photo albums, the man looked at him and said, "You remind me of someone who's still figuring it out." Brandon nodded. "I am." Weeks later, as a spring storm rolled over Washington and flags whipped in the wind above the Capitol, Specialist Morales stood again at Constitution Avenue. The crowd was larger now, more organized. A group of students held small American flags. A group of elderly veterans stood in silence. As the drill began, no one crossed the line. No one mocked. But a few pointed quietly at Morales. A couple even saluted. Not because of rank, because of what he stood for. True respect isn't something you're born with. It's not something you can buy, wear, or fake. It's something you earn, step by silent step, in how you carry yourself, in the discipline to remain still when others would explode, in the strength to walk away when pride begs you to fight. Now we ask you, if you were Specialist Morales, how would you have handled the moment? Would you have stepped forward or stood still? Would you have spoken or remained silent? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that honor still lives in quiet corners of our world, then please hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful true stories from Authority Watch. Because sometimes the greatest authority comes not from power, but from posture.